Sending an invoice out to a client is just the first step in the accounts receivable process. Eventually, the payment is going to come in, and the way that you record that in QuickBooks has far-reaching effects, not just on your reports and whether or not a transaction is going to match up with what flows through on your bank feed, but also on whether or not you might end up inadvertently duplicating your income. So let's go ahead and dive into the process of how to correctly receive payments against open invoices in QuickBooks Online. So we can do this in a number of ways. We can first start by going up to the plus create button and then selecting receive payment under customers. This takes us to a screen where we can receive the payment. Now, for the purposes of this example, I am pretending that people sent me checks in the mail. So given that they sent me checks, I know who is paying me. But if you weren't sure who was paying you, or if you wanted to look at an entire list of outstanding invoices, there are a few other places you can go to look at what is still owed to you. And I'm going to show you where in just a moment. But let's go ahead and dive in with our first example. So I have a check here in front of me, in theory, from Amanda Reyes for $3,510. Okay, so I need to go ahead and receive that against the open invoice that's on file for her. So I can select Amanda Reyes from the drop-down menu. And sure enough, I see that there is an open invoice for her right here. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go ahead and enter a little bit of additional information. So first of all, today is the 24th, but I'm going to want to go ahead and backdate this just a little bit because she actually issued the check to me on the 20th of March. Okay, so I'm going to enter 0320. Okay, I'm also going to say that this is a check that we are going to be depositing into the bank. And since I've received multiple checks, I'm actually not going to have it go to the business checking account. I'm going to put it into undeposited funds so that I can group it with future deposits. So the reference number for this check is 5732. So that is the check number for the check that was issued for this payment. You do not have to put a reference number in when you are going through the process of receiving a payment, but any additional information that you provide is going to help if you end up having any questions about this transaction down the road, okay? And when you do deposit the check into the bank, you are going to have the check image. So just being sure that the check that you are recording here is what ends up going in the bank, and having all of that detail tied together is really beneficial in the long run. So the final piece here is I'm going to enter the amount received. Now, of course, in an ideal world, it would be the exact amount of the invoice. Unfortunately, she cut the check for $3,510, not for $3,570, okay? So what happens in a case like this? Well, we only want to receive payment for the amount that she actually paid. We want to be sure that if somebody underpaid their invoice, we are able to let them know and collect further payment from them. So if I leave this as is and hit record and close, then it will still show that there is a balance of $60 on this particular invoice. Now, just really quickly for the sake of this example, let's say that it was the other way. Let's say that she accidentally wrote the check for $670, not for $570. If that were the case, whoops, we don't want to make it $36,000. That would be way outlandish. If that were the case, and I'll click outside of the box so that it applies. Whoops, oh, I'm sorry. We want to put that in the payment received amount. So if she had put $3,670, we would see it's not going to let us apply more than that $3,570 to this particular invoice. So what it does is it pays the invoice in full, and it says amount to credit is $100. Okay, so that will mean that a credit memo for $100 will show up on her account, and it could be applied to her next invoice. Conversely, you can actually go ahead and issue a refund from that credit memo as well if she would rather have the money back, okay? But again, for the sake of this example, we're saying that she sent the check for $3,510 instead of $3,570. So we will go ahead and hit record and close on this, okay? So as I said, there are a few other ways that we could go about receiving payment against an invoice. we could possibly go to our reports and then look at our accounts receivable aging summary. And it would give us the list of outstanding invoices. So if I were to click on this next invoice from Elena Garcia, who did also send us a check, and then click into view the invoice, I can actually hit receive payment right on the invoice and receive the payment. So the rest of the steps there are going to be the same, okay? I'm going to enter that the payment was received on March 20th. I'm going to put check as the payment method. I am going to add the reference number because I happen to have that available to me. And this check is also going into undeposited funds like the one that we received from Amanda Reyes. So since this one is for the correct amount, there is no further action required from me. I can just go ahead and hit record. I could also, instead of hitting record or record and close, I could say record anew since I do have one more payment to receive still. And if I hit record anew, again, I just get a blank receive payment and I can go ahead and select the customer from the drop-down menu and go through the process of receiving that payment. So she also sent the correct amount, or I'm sorry, we want to enter the check payment method and then the amount received. And then we'll hit record and close. Now, it just so happened that all of those clients only had one open invoice and they were paying them. But if you had a client who had sent a check that was covering multiple invoices, once you entered their name in that receive payment screen, all of the open invoices for them would show up and you could apply that payment accordingly. So that is the process of receiving payments in QuickBooks Online if we have AR, in other words, outstanding invoices on the books. And we want to walk through this process because if we are receiving money and then depositing into our account, we want to go ahead and make sure that that deposit is recorded and then matched on the bank feed side. If we don't do this, if we leave the invoices open on the books, and if we record the income coming into our checking accounts just as income, if we just put it to any income account instead of matching it up with those open invoices, we will actually end up duplicating our income if we are on accrual basis accounting. And either way, if we're using QuickBooks to do our invoicing, we want to be sure that we are receiving payments against invoices as customers send payment to us, because those invoices are still visible to our clients. And if they sent us payment, we want to be showing them that we are keeping our records up to date and not requesting collection on something that they don't owe us. So as I said, we can see here, Amanda Reyes does still owe us this $60. I would probably do one of two things at this point. I would either send her a message and say, hey, you underpaid by a certain amount. Please send remittance for the remaining $60 as soon as possible. Or depending on the circumstances, I might choose to write this amount off. Okay. Additionally, you might also have an issue of a customer willfully underpaying, right? Maybe something arrived to them broken if you have an inventory or items-based business and they're only paying for what wasn't broken. That's something that you might have to sort out. So keeping this underpayment on the books until you decide how to resolve it is probably the best way to go. All right. Thank you so very much for watching. I am Holly from Accrual Mistress Bookkeeping and Consulting. If you found this helpful, please do subscribe. And don't forget to kind of keep up because I will be continuing to post more videos. Up next will be one on what we actually do with undeposited funds. So we're going to talk about what happens once all of these amounts land in undeposited funds and how we actually ultimately get those to match our bank account.